Chris Honorato and the closer, Brian Mariano, in for Roger this week on Big Board Sports 104.5, the team, ESPN Radio. Kristaps Porzingis skipped his exit meeting with Phil Jackson, but has since commented that he loves New York, wants to be in New York, and there's a mess going on in New York, closer, and it stems, obviously, from what appears to now be a broken marriage between Phil Jackson and Carmelo Anthony. To help sort through some of this mess in New York, ESPN New York's Ian Begley joins us here on Big Board Sports. Ian, Chris Honorato, and Brian Mariano with you here this morning. How are you?
Chris, Brian, what's going on? How are you guys?
We are doing well, man. First, I want to get your thoughts, and I know you've said this on ESPN TV already, that Phil Jackson should be concerned with Kristaps Porzingis' happiness, I guess, going forward for the future here. What have you heard lately about the missed exit meeting and Porzingis' mental state of mind here with this franchise?
He's frustrated. That's why he skipped the meeting. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to get his point across in a forceful way. And, agree or disagree with what he did, he certainly got his point across. He's kind of uncertain about the direction of this team going forward based on what he's seen so far. The Knicks have lost 101 games over the last two seasons, Porzingis' 2 seasons. He publicly expressed frustration about changing the system, both defensively and offensively, a couple times this year, and that leading to confusion. He said there was confusion from top to bottom in the organization's top, including Phil Jackson. And, he really wanted to, I assume, and I've heard, just let everyone know, let the organization know how frustrated he is. And, listen, he's under contract for another 2 years, but who's to say that he doesn't say, hey, I don't want to play here anymore, get me out of here. I'm not saying that's where he is right now. I'm saying he's frustrated right now, but if this is not dealt with and if they don't get on the same page with Kristaps, they being Knick management, there's a real possibility that he could say, hey, I don't want to play here anymore, or he could just leave in free agency in a few years and, leave a lot of money on the table, but leave New York. And that would be a travesty for this Knick fan base, which has held on to hope over these last 2 miserable seasons solely because you have Kristaps Porzingis, a guy who seems like a player who a franchise can build a contender around. So they need to get with Kristaps and make sure they're on the same page going forward.
Ian, the NBA is one of the 4 major sports where basically the stars kind of run the show, and all the stuff that happened this year with the Knicks between Melo and Phil, and now you see this with Porzingis. Do you think it's more of a Carmelo had his issues with Phil, now Kristaps realizes that there are issues with Phil, and they kind of coexist and talked about these problems, and maybe they're looking to go elsewhere together?
No, I don't see it that way. I mean, listen, Kristaps likes Carmelo a lot. They've developed a strong relationship over the last 2 years, but what Kristaps did in skipping the exit meeting wasn't directly tied to Carmelo Anthony's situation. It was more about his own frustration and his concerns about the future and kind of developing a winning culture and developing the franchise the right way and putting himself in the best position for his career. I think that's where that frustration came from. I mean, listen, the drama surrounding Carmelo Anthony certainly added to the confusion around this team this season and the confusion among players in that locker room. But I didn't see this thing on Friday, Kristaps skipping the exit meeting, as directly tied to Carmelo's situation.
Ian, what is this team going to look like next year? Obviously, so much speculation still that after Phil Jackson says what he says in his one meeting with the media this year, although I guess going back to September, that makes 2. Will Carmelo Anthony be on this team? Will the Knicks find an equitable trade partner for Melo?
The only way Carmelo is on this team, I think, well, there are 2 ways. One way is if Phil Jackson gets fired, and that doesn't seem likely at this point. The other way is if he decides to say, forget you, Phil. I'm going to stay here in spite of you. I'm going to make life difficult for you. I'm not going to waive my no-trade clause. Then you get into a situation where maybe the Knicks decide to bench Carmelo, I don't think they would waive Carmelo because you're going to need $54 million, and that's a lot of money. But it could be just an ugly situation, a huge distraction for this team when you get to that point. So I would expect Carmelo to ultimately waive that no-trade clause. I think the market for Carmelo will become more clear, after the playoffs. Because, if you're a contending team and you make an early exit and you think, hey, we have a good group here, maybe we're a Carmelo Anthony away from making a run to the finals, maybe you're more aggressive in trying to make a deal for Melo. So I think a lot of it depends on how things shake out over the next few weeks in the NBA. But I do think there will be a trade market for Melo. The problem is, Phil has told the world that he wants to deal Carmelo.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He has indirectly disparaged Carmelo publicly, even though he says he didn't think he did. He did. So he's hurt Carmelo's trade value by the things that he's done, I think. And I think if teams know that the Knicks are desperate to get rid of Carmelo, and Carmelo has a no-trade clause, so he dictates where he goes, I think the Knicks are dealing from a position of weakness here.
Ian, earlier this week, they broke the ties for the records in the draft lottery, and the Knicks lost to Minnesota, so they'll be 7th in that order. I have an issue with them breaking ties with coin flips. Is there any other way we can do this other than the teams getting together, flipping a coin, and obviously getting picks to where it could change the course of franchises?
You know what's funny? They actually did it with ping pong balls. But I think it was 3 ping pong balls with each team's emblem into a hopper, and they drew the one ping pong ball. The first ball to come out, I think, was the winner. So
okay, I could deal with
that's
that.
how the Knicks lost that pick. I don't know if you like that mode any better than the coin flip. I don't think there's an ideal situation.
Ian, I told Brian the Knicks blew it by winning too many games down the stretch.
That's what hurt them. I mean, ultimately, if you're a fan who looks at the tanking standings, and I was taking a close look at them all the way throughout the end of the season, because what else do we have to pay attention to? The Knicks were at one point tied for the 4th worst record in the league. That would have put them in pretty good position to obviously land a top 5 pick, top 3 pick possibly, and they won some games down the stretch. So that hurt them in those lottery standings. And now they're sitting at 7th, which you should still get a good player in this draft, according to people who pay close attention to these draft prospects. They say they're good players, 1 to 8, 1 to 9, 1 to 10. So, the Knicks are fortunate there, but, they had the opportunity to kind of have a better selection pool, and they lost that opportunity by winning some games down the stretch.
Ian, I want to go outside of the Knicks with you here for a second, just as an NBA guy. Do you see any possible way we are in June in the NBA Finals and it isn't the Warriors and Cavaliers playing?
It's hard to see that, man, because it just seems like these two are on a collision course, right? I mean, that's what it's been like since late October. Heck, that's what it's been like since late June when the last final ended. It just seemed like these two teams are destined to meet again. And, you look at the East, and you have a Boston team, top seed, that looks like it's crumbling against that 8th seed in Chicago. And, the Warriors will be tested out west, but I don't see any legit tests to get them to maybe a Game 7 and to get them to where they're sweating in a series. I think, San Antonio's a team that may be able to do that. Houston's a team that may be able to do that, but they just look so locked in, at least early on in this playoffs. And Cleveland has struggled a little bit with Indiana, but I don't think there's a team in the East right now that can give them any trouble. Maybe Washington, if Washington continues to stay hot, maybe they get there, but I don't think there's any legit contender to these two teams. So I would be surprised if we didn't have these two facing off yet again in late June.
Ian, is there any way, looking at the realm of the NBA now, that the Knicks will actually hold on? What's the future for Derrick Rose? I mean, I'm kind of confused on exactly where they're going to go. If they draft a point guard, what they're going to do with Derrick Rose?
Yeah, I think that what they should end up doing, what they may end up doing, is even if they draft a point guard, I think they'll be looking for a veteran in free agency to bring in to kind of allow that rookie point guard some leeway and some slack, and not to have to throw him to the wolves, so to speak, right away. So I think, but what may end up happening, depending on what happens with the Carmelo Anthony situation, is they select a point guard with their first-round draft pick. I know they like the kid from France, Frank Ntilikina. I may be mispronouncing his name. I know they like the kid from Kentucky, De'Aaron Fox. So it depends on where they end up in the draft, obviously, and who's available. But I would expect them to take a point guard and then to find a veteran point guard in free agency. And Derrick Rose is not off the table. He is certainly an option at this point. I think there are other players who are at the top of the Knicks wish list when it comes to free agent point guards ahead of Derrick Rose, but Derrick is on that list. And I think the same would be true for Derrick. He probably, in a perfect world, would head elsewhere, but the Knicks are an option for him. So I think they're both, the Knicks and Derrick Rose, are kind of secondary options for each other in free agency, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they ended up together just because their options would be limited. So kind of have to see how that plays out. But obviously, it all changes if the Knicks trade Carmelo before the draft because, then they're going to need a small forward. They're going to need somebody to replace Carmelo in that starting lineup. And they pursue that through the draft, or they pursue that through free agency. They can go either route, but either way, their plans do change a little bit if and when Carmelo is dealt.
Ian Begley covers the Knicks for ESPN. Ian, really appreciate the time here this morning, man, and hope to catch up with you down the road after the Knicks make a draft selection and or trade Carmelo Anthony.
All sounds good, fellas. Thanks for having me. Take
Thanks,
care.
Ian. Have a good one, man.